Hello again, friends. We meet again. What a lovely day it is. Are you excited for a grand day? I'm finally reaping the rewards of all of my hard work. I've got the fairy ring in my house. Oh, let me just nom 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 nom. I've got finally the ability where I can allow myself to do some slay boy. I still need to go get 4 more smithing levels, but I will do that sometime. Not now. But I'm going to go kill some stuff because I feel like killing stuff. And I have earned it. I have so earned it after a lot of my recent grinding. It is most definitely time for me to have fun. The favorite skill. The enjoyableness. Ooh. Game sounds a little bit loud. Let's get some, yeah, there we go. There we go. Popping off. Perfect. Whap. So anyways, I thought an interesting, before I begin rambling on about stuff, by the way, I'm not going to go do my herbs because I have no new herbs to plant. I need to do thieving to get more herbs, but I refuse. Plus, I have, I think I have way more than this much EXP in the bank as far as herbalism goes. So I have enough for the Rock Elite with the boost, so there's no, rush until I have, a straight 90 ready, which I don't have yet, but I probably will in a, X amount of time. I don't know how long, how many more contracts, and how much thieving I'm off. I'll definitely have enough for 91 or 90 herbalism after I do the 91 thieving grind for the Elite Desert relatively soon. I also have 21 mil cash now from all those high elks while I was doing agility, so I can go through that. I can dump the 18 mil or whatever it's gonna cost me to get bloody 91 fletching for the diary as well. I might go all the way to 95, but that's a lot more gold. We'll just have to see. And then after I slam out a few of those things, I can start working on the glorious Corrupted Gauntlet grind. That's going to be a nightmare and a half, but, it is what it is. What a lovely little atmosphere it is out here. Oh, man, near Moon Clan Village. How exciting. So anyways, I thought a good topic for discussion today would be a defense of the racism. That's right, folks. I'm going there. I'm going to make arguments about racism, and yeah. So let's start that. Let's start at the basics like you always want to start. Let's start by defining racism. So in this context, I'm not going to define racism like your average wokester would. By the way, the definition of woke is racist against white people. Let's just come out and say it. I know a lot of conservative commentators refuse to, point out that obvious fact, but that's the reality of the situation. That's what being woke means, that you're just racist against white people. So I'm going to define racism as a preference for individuals based on, their race. I'm going to make an argument that, just statistically speaking, there are differences between the races. And, I will explain why we have preferences for the ones we do. So let's begin. I'm sure some of you at least have heard of the halo principle, or the fact that, you're going to perceive, at least initially, attractive people as, better by some degree, let's say, than not attractive people, right? I think that's fair. Most people agree that there are, visual-based preferences. You can experience it no matter where you are, or where you work, or what you do. Very attractive people are going to generally have an easier time. They're going to be, more socially involved. That's just a fact of life. And you're going to perceive anything an attractive person does of equal work as good, if not better, than, someone who's less attractive that does the exact same thing. And, this is pretty obvious if you've ever examined human interactions or looked at, attractive people and how they are, appraised by other people. Now, what does this have to do with racism, for instance? Well, almost all creeds, cultures, everything has an affinity for lighter skinned people. That's just, part and parcel of being human at this point. Like, the entire critical race theory is based upon this. I guess I should go into that. That's quite a loaded statement, but I'll go into that in a second. But, I pretty much cannot think of a culture in which the most fair individuals, i.e., fair skinned, are not represented at least higher on the beauty scale than not. Like, Philippines, same thing. Like, they like their light skins. Every single culture likes more light skinned as far as, aesthetic preferences in general. Obviously, individuals can have different preferences. There may be a culture I'm unaware of or not thinking of at the moment that has different, but let's just say the vast majority of people are going to assume that the lighter skin, the more generally attractive one, has the capability of being. Now, you can lament that, and you can, apply Marxism, aka critical theory, to race and derive that as well, if you were so inclined. So let's make some more definitions here while we're going through this. Critical race theory is just an application of Marxist critical theory, but with a racial lens instead of a class lens. So pretty obvious, pretty sound. Critical theory is just being critical of everything, or in this case, analyzing actions and opinions through a critical lens. And I'm not going to go through an entire Marxist ideological argument. That'll take hours. So we'll just leave it at that. And then if you want to research further, you can research critical theory and critical race theory more in depth. The original Harvard paper that details it, all of that. I'm not going to do that here. You're welcome to, though, if you want to research more. If you disagree with my adaptation of that, or you dislike it, feel free to, but I disagree. Anyways, so, if we believe that, like what critical race theory says, that the light skin tone is oppressive just in its very nature without any actions, just because it is more aesthetically pleasing than the darker skin tones, and that they have inbuilt privilege and preference because of that, certainly plausible. Now, where I'll differ from Marxists is in my conclusions and how I feel about these sort of things. So if you're a critical race theory or Marxist interpretation, you'll believe that these inbuilt preferences are unique and they, are detrimental to society. And you, of course, ignore the, gendered preferences and all of the other preferences, socioeconomic preferences, racial preferences you're describing, and all in favor of this one little thing, and then view the entire world through this lens. And, I mean, you're welcome to do that, even if it's a very blank and very hollow worldview, much like most of what Marxism is. But you're certainly welcome to do that if it, helps you try and get towards your praxis, or, fund your neo-Greek pedophile government. But at the end of the day, there is a halo effect. Lighter-skinned people generally are going to be more aesthetically pleasing than darker skins. And this is just inbuilt into human nature. And so is racism. Racism, by default, is the normal reaction for human beings. And not only that, but you could justify it in a number of ways. For instance, people with, people have different factors all about them. There is a different intelligence. For instance, Ashkenazi Jews, on average, are the most intelligent people. They're predisposed, to schizophrenia, and that's just racial components or the way their genome is arranged. Like, Caucasians have a different skull shape than, Asiatics, than African Americans, than regular Africans, than everyone. And, one of my coworkers actually brought up this argument to me that, African Americans, somehow were bred for, work, so they were stronger and all of that, which is total bunk, obviously. African Americans are stronger because, their differences in their skeleton and their bone shape and their DNA, which slightly promotes certain aspects to them. Just like how, certain Kenyans are built for running, and, the higher atmosphere and all of that has an impact on their physique. And over time, they evolved and developed that way. Perfectly reasonable, I feel like, to assume that. By the way, I'm aware this Slayer task is a waste of time. I just wanted something nice and easy. Bop, 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 bop. Stop hitting me to it once. I don't want to waste food, and I don't want to start praying yet. I hope I can make the 40 kills last this inventory, but maybe not. So anyways, we've established that, for instance, so far just in the definitions, that, racism is natural, and that it's going to favor, like most things do in the universe, light-skinned people, and that the general differences of the races are completely acceptable. Now, if you're a woke person, you might say, well, white people this, white people that, conquer all of that colonization. Correct. I thought if you were a woke person, though, you were not willing to accept that there are differences in the race. Yay, ding. Oh my god. 93 combat. Oh. But I thought if you were a woke person, you were unwilling to accept that there could be, canonical differences in race, besides just, the level of melanin in their skin, and no transitory differences. And yet, you seem to despise white people based on, immutable characteristics. But, I'm not against them disliking white people based on immutable characteristics. You're perfectly welcome to do that. You can make your argument. For instance, I won't go into too much, just because of the place where I'm at, about the different races and racism in general, but let's talk about, some of the less ideal elements about Caucasians, for instance, besides just the fact that they're the most aesthetically pleasing race. So, naturally, because of their location in the world and just the societies that developed in general, white people excel at combat and conquest. Basically, Caucasians are the most violent, and the world up until just very recently was ruled by the principle of might makes right, and it still might. That's a term that could be under debate. So might makes right might still be the actual way the entire world is is ruled. And so when you have one race of people, Caucasians, which is by far and away the most violent, and I don't think anyone would really dispute that if you examine the facts. Like the last time Caucasians got mad at another race in general, we have 2 cities nuked. So let's be clear here, not to mention that whole World War II thing, but we'll just go with Caucasian racial violence against another race. Like, a lot of these Stormfront people will be like, well, them X, Y, and Z are so violent. Maybe on an individual level in certain circumstances in a more civilized society, but compared to like the kind of violence Caucasians can output on a massive scale, it's not even close. Like, there's no race that could even come within an order of magnitude of violence that white people are capable of. They excel so much in it, that's how they dominated the entire world. And you can dislike that or like that, or you can say conquest is perfectly fine, and those are certainly arguments, but at the end of the day, like, I think most people are willing to accept that as a difference between Caucasians and other races. And so if you're some woke scold, you're not going to be able to interpret that as a difference between races, and they seem to do so effortlessly, because being woke just means you're racist against Caucasian peoples. And so I'm also not really against that, like, through these self-critiques, and through like a lot of this comes a lot of improvement, and especially considering the whole aggression angle and all of the other things. Why have I not repotted? I'm retarded. But especially through a lot of these potential lenses you can view the different races through, there's a lot of room for self-improvement and combating, say, maybe natural inadequacies in any given race or extent of races, right? And sure, that's obviously not ideal, but the stereotypes do exist for a reason. There was, at a time, something like, I want to say like 8 studies, each with X amount of $1 million. I forget the total amount that was spent on it, but there were 8 different studies to try and conduct an IQ test, which had normalized the results between all the races, and it simply just was not possible. Asians smarter than Caucasians, less intelligent than Jews, slightly more intelligent than Africans. Like, Asiatics, they do some problem solving, some good problem solving, y'all. And certainly even the poorest of X, Y, and Z race still fell ahead of the bounds of the other races on average, no matter which way you structured it. So it's not an economic factor, but there really isn't any other way to explain it other than a racial factor. And that's something that they really hate, which is why they did 8 different studies on it, for instance. I'm not going to bother linking them or looking them up. Like, these are quite famous. Everyone can go and analyze them at your own and, form your own opinion, obviously. That you're free to do that. I'm just, sharing mine. And so we haven't gotten to what's wrong with racism, though, since I've yet to see or talk with another human being alive that wasn't racist, at least in, the classical definition of the word to some extent. Either they were racist against white people or racist against, a plethora of other things. They didn't really like the Muslims, for instance. They didn't like the X, Y, and Z. I've never met someone that truly was not racist and considered all the races equal, who did not examine the differences. And I'm not talking about cultural differences here, like the type of food they eat. I'm talking about genetic differences between the races. And anyone who says otherwise, I think quickly, you analyze their views for more than like 0.5 seconds and they utterly fall apart. So I'm not even sure they really dislike the term racism or racism in general. I think it's more just like sort of this it's sort of this like pervasive lie that goes throughout society. Like, for instance, the whole sex work is real work sort of thing. You don't think that, or else it would be perfectly normalized for a boss to ask, for instance, a coworker for a sexual favor, and there would be nothing wrong with that connotation if, sex work was quote-unquote real work. It's something obviously very independent and different. I'm not saying it's bad or anything like that, although I will argue that later on, potentially. But for the merits of this discussion, like, it's another one of those things in which people seem to, crow about it, but I don't really see it as impacting them, or they're not living true to their actual beliefs in the matter. The same thing happens with racism. So I'm not even sure it's bad. I think it's a useful tool for critique. I think that, accepting the differences between races and then organizing societies more optimally around them and focusing on, promoting X, Y, and Z in certain races really helps. Like, I think, for instance, Trump's opportunity zones were, while extremely racist by just definition, were actually a very good way to analyze and distribute resources to further improve races that have low socioeconomic development in the United States. And while it certainly was a racist policy, it still worked flawlessly, and it was one of the main... What? Who sets up a cannon? Is this guy like... Yeah, this guy is some low IQ. Whatever, I'll just hop. But Jesus Christ. What is he doing? Anyways, what a weird... I should get rid of this ROM. I'm never going to use it anymore unless I want to go back to Oriana, but I probably don't. But anyways, before that distraction and a half, so I don't really think racism is a bad thing, and I've never heard an argument to me that makes sense calling racism a bad thing either. Like, I've heard a lot of arguments that, judging people based on immutable characteristics is wrong, as they judge people by immutable characteristics, but that's just the way the world works, and there's certainly nothing wrong with that. Certain characteristics are just going to be predisposed to certain things. And obviously, you can overcome those through your own actions and your own abilities, but you shouldn't expect people to assume you've overcome them before you actually have. They exist for a reason. And another point is that if you do manage to overcome these things, the story is all the more interesting, and the people then are all the more interesting when you examine them as a whole and are honest about their characteristics potentially. So, I've still never really heard a good argument against racism. I've heard arguments that are two-faced, that, the hippy-dippy, like, la-di-da social platitudes, but if I try and think of arguments against racism, they all seem to really fall flat as well. Like, I've heard arguments, that, like, it has real-world impacts, but, so does people's attractiveness, and everyone literally is judged by their attractiveness. And it's up to you, if you're an ugly person, for instance, to prove yourself otherwise. Prove yourself either competent or incompetent. Now, I have failed to do that, obviously. I am a degenerate, ugly Amerigolem who has proven himself to be completely incompetent at everything. But here we are, I still do. And as I recommend, anyone else still do. So, there's no one on the internet that faces more just flat-out racism than the Jews. Period. Not even close. And I'm fine with that. It's hilarious. Let me tell you, I could tell you some amazing jokes. I can't because of the platform we're on, but I would love to some other time. And so, at some point, people are going to have to accept that, like, and I guess some people are going to, like, try the hyperbole, like, well, people die when they are killed because of the racism. It's like, no, generally speaking, people have been lynched of all races. All races have been slaves at one point or another. Those aren't really arguments. Those are misnomers. You're, like, using your bias of your current relative situation to try and make things overextended. And, like, there are still slaves in the current world today, and there's still probably slaves of all different races. people are still trafficked of all different races, even now as you speak. So, that's not really an argument against racism, nor does it have anything to do with racism, I think. And as the edgy boy that I am, I just like it in general. I'm going to be honest. But yeah, I don't know. Maybe there's something I'm missing about this, but I get the topic is taboo in modern day speaking, and you're not allowed to even discuss it or even analyze why things might be the way they are, but that's just me. I just can't help it. I think it's a good thing. I think the world needs more of it, and I think it's time to return to a traditional sense of racism. And I really hope that at some point in the future we do, and I hope I get to be an edgy boy in public. I still remember when I was a young mad lad on the internet, the amount of fun I could have doing that kind of stuff. And I'm quite excited to return to that sort of thing sometime in the future. But yeah, that was the politically correct version of the racist talk. Sadly, we won't be able to go any deeper than that. Maybe I'll make like a Gilded or something where things like that can happen. But for right now, that's all. And I will continue to slay these Sukas. And then I will block this task the next time I get it, because this is slow and tedious. But I'm having fun, at least. I'm enjoying it. And I hope you guys enjoyed that talk. That was my TED Talk. The Industrial Revolution was a disaster for the human race. That was my TED Talk. If you get the reference. If not, it's okay. You have a great day. Bye-bye.